KoitCast.
Today's guest is the president of the Forever Family Foundation, an organisation that aims to document the proof that there is indeed life after death. He's also a paranormal expert with a wealth of experience as a parapsychologist and holds a Master of Science degree in parapsychology with a second in Cultural Anthropology. He's also authored many books on psi-based topics. Please give a huge Koit welcome to Loyd Auerbach. Hi Loyd, and welcome to KoitCast.
Thank you, Koit.
It's great to have you here, by the way, and I just really appreciate you coming on, so thank you for that. Always with the first question, who are you, where do you come from, etc.?
Okay, so I'm Loyd Auerbach. I am a 40-plus year veteran in the field of parapsychology, specializing in education and field investigation. I am director of a group called the Office of Paranormal Investigations, president of the Forever Family Foundation, which is an organization, all volunteer, that works with spirit mediums in the family grieving process and supports scientific research in survival of bodily death. I'm president of the board of directors of the Ryan Research Center, and also one of the lead instructors for the Ryan Education Center, teach online courses in parapsychology. And I'm connected to a whole bunch of other places as well. Author of 9 paranormal books that are nonfiction, 2 paranormal mystery novels, co-author of those, and kind of pretty active in certain other areas as well. And finally, I am a former magician and mentalist these days. I've been performing since around 1990, performing mentalism for the most part, and also an occasional chocolatier.
Oh, I like that last one, chocolatier. As if you haven't got enough fingers in many, many pies.
Well, you have to have stuff to keep you busy.
Exactly, you've got to fill up your time.
Right.
Let's dive straight in then. What brought you into the paranormal theatre? What was your introduction, your origin story, if you will?
Well, my origin story in reality has nothing to do with an experience. It has everything to do with pop culture in some respects. My dad worked for NBC. I had a TV set in my room when I was 2, apparently.
Whoa.
And kind of grew up watching television. So in my early life, I was fixated in a couple of different shows, one of which was a show called Topper, which was a guy who had ghosts. You can find episodes of that on the Internet Archive and on YouTube, kind of a comedy. And then another couple shows as a kid, I watched The Twilight Zone. This is actually, I was like 4 or 5 years old watching shows. I watched a show called One Step Beyond. Again, you can find plenty of episodes out there, which, as I learned, really dramatized actual psychic experiences. I was a little science geeky kid, but very interested in folklore as well. And in the mid-1960s, besides Star Trek really encouraging and other science fiction that I read a lot of comic books, I still do, science fiction, it all really encouraged the whole idea of psychic phenomena as not being scary at all, of being like human potential in essence. And then I heard the word parapsychology actually on the TV show Dark Shadows, even though it featured a vampire and werewolf and other things. Mm-hmm. And so I went to the library to look for books on parapsychology, and I found books by J.B. Rhine, J.G. Pratt, and others, the scientists who wrote books on parapsychology, and that kind of captured my attention at that point.
So a couple of questions arose from all that, and that's great, by the way. Do you think if you hadn't have been given that television, you wouldn't be where you are now?
I was taught to read. My mom was a preschool teacher. She taught me to read when I was 4, and I started out reading things like Greek mythology and Norse mythology, but also comic books. I mean, we go to the store, the stationery store every week, and I pick up Superman and other comic books. I actually read the word parapsychology in a Superman comic first. So this whole idea of superheroes and of people being better, than that. I think that if I had never had television, it would have been a much longer time period before I discovered those books. But I still would have discovered them. And, with my dad and TV, there's no way I couldn't have had TV. My uncle was actually a soap opera director. So, I mean, I grew up in a media family. There's just no way around this for me.
Yeah. I was just keen to know whether you thought, if fate is a thing, whether that was your path designed.
ever since the universe kind of put me on this path to become a parapsychologist in so many different ways. I had a parapsychology club in high school that I started with some friends and two teachers, a physics teacher and an earth science teacher. And I met local parapsychologists in the New York area through a neighbor of mine. So there were little synchronicities along the way that kept me going the entire time.
I think I'm in a similar boat to you, not in the parapsychology side of things, but I think Star Trek, it was reruns in the UK because I was born
Right.
mid 70s. The reruns of Star Trek is what led me to also go to the library and look for books on UFOs and stuff, but not the parapsychology
Sure,
side of things,
sure.
but directly into the mysteries.
Yeah, I think science fiction really gets a lot of us into it. Which I've
Yeah.
lectured on that. In fact, over time, even taught a course for the Rhine Center. That if you approach this field, all the unexplained, from a science fiction perspective versus the horror perspective, which unfortunately so many ghost hunters do,
Hmm.
there's a lot less to be afraid of and a lot to be excited by.
I agree with you. The mystery is amazing. I love the mystery.
Right.
I think for me in Star Trek, that end scene where you had that almost like the grey alien face.
Yeah.
It's that
Yeah.
image, and I imagine that's going to be the same image for a lot of people that might spur them
Well,
on.
and interestingly enough, someone who was speaking on UFOs and abductions and things put that image up in a lecture that I saw, claiming that several of her hypnotically regressed people said that was one of the lead aliens, and that she could not find any pop culture reference to that. And I thought, yeah, that's exactly what I thought.
Yeah, it's so
That was
obvious that one.
Everybody in the world has seen that image.
Yes, yes. Very communion nowadays, isn't it,
Yeah.
that one?
Yeah.
I want to lead directly into the first topic of choice of mine, which is ghosts. Now, obviously, you're big in the ghost arena, so to speak. So let's give it a grounding. What are ghosts from your perspective?
Well, I mean, the term has so many different meanings thanks to pop culture, but also cross-culturally, it has a lot of meanings. In our field, in parapsychology, when we talk about, if I use the word ghost, what I'm really referring to is the term we often use, which is an apparition. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the concept of consciousness, personality, surviving the death of the body, and capable of interacting with people in the physical world. So, I work with a lot of mediums through the Forever Family Foundation, and some of them have told me that they would use the word ghost for someone who is still in the physical world, even though they've died, where they'll use the word spirit for someone who's passed on to whatever the next level of existence is. So when we talk about apparitions or ghosts, we're talking about conscious entities that have some ability to interact with us, although that interaction is partly us being psychic and picking up on them as well.
That's an interesting thought, isn't it? That it's not all one way; it's a two-way thing.
Yeah, it's definitely not all one way, which is why some people have different kinds of experiences with the exact same apparition. I mean, there are cases on record where one person sees this apparition in this place, and then somebody else says, well, I don't see anybody, but I'm hearing something. I'm hearing a voice. Somebody else might say, well, I don't know, I'm smelling perfume.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then somebody else, and two other people might say, yeah, there's nothing.
Yes. I'm
So
one of
it's
those nothing people. What are you?
for the most part, I'm a nothing person too.
It sounds horrible when you
I
put it like that, doesn't it?
Yeah, I've had a few experiences with some of my longer term cases where I've kind of at least felt or sensed a presence, and in a couple of cases actually heard a voice, smelled. Never actually seen an apparition because, again, it's how we process information psychically and through our perceptions. And I guess I'm just not visual when it comes to that.
Yeah. Now, would you like to be?
Sure, sure, I have no problem with that. I would very much like to have more conversations like Cosmo Topper did in the old Topper TV show.
Can I expand further on that? Do you have fear of it in any way, shape, or form?
Oh, yeah. Actually, I am not afraid of anything paranormal at all. Um, there's one aspect of being psychic that can be bad, and that's if you suddenly open up your psychic perceptions and you get overloaded with information. So that can be bad for people. But otherwise, there just isn't enough evidence at all that ghosts can hurt people.
Hmm.
Even most of them don't even have the ability, it seems, to move things, which is really interesting. They have to kind of learn to do that. I am much more hesitant and afraid of living people. And I've been in a few
Mm.
situations where it wasn't anything paranormal, but there was a fear because of the living people.
Very, very real danger. Very
Yeah,
present
I mean,
real
ghosts don't
danger.
carry guns and knives, so it's not a big deal.
That you're aware of. Yeah, I know what you mean. That's
No,
100%
I
true.
haven't seen it. We haven't heard of anything like that.
No, and I've not seen it, so it can't be real.
Yeah.
What is this is going to dive right into the meat and potatoes, but what is the best ghost stroke apparition case that you've investigated or are aware of, do you think? If you had to
Well,
pinpoint one.
the one that I've investigated, kind of the one that put me over the top in terms of accepting that apparitions are real, because we have other psychic possible explanations, ESP related explanations for a number of things. And in fact, most of what people experience are what are called hauntings or residual hauntings, picking up information from people in the past. And it could have been like recently or quite a ways. And it looks like people. So folks immediately assume it's a ghost, even though it's not interactive. It's just a recording.
Yeah.
So back in about the beginning of 1985, we actually still had our graduate parapsychology program running at John F. Kennedy University. That's a program that ran for about 11 years. And we got a call that I took from a woman who said that they have a ghost in their house. And her son had been talking to the ghost since they moved in about a year and a half. She only found that out today, although she had seen the ghost, and she said she had spoken to her husband had seen the ghost, and her mother had seen the ghost on visits. So it wasn't a situation where just the kid is seeing this stuff. And she was just more curious as to whether it was okay for this boy who was about almost 13 years old to grow up talking to a ghost every day, which is an interesting question.
It is.
Yeah. So in the investigation, I was there with a couple other folks on the drive over to the town. It was about 40-minute drive from the university where I picked up one of the students there. And we had a conversation that had nothing to do with anything to do with the case, about the car. My car was dying, so I was buying a new car. My first wife, was my wife at the time, was thinking, she was with us, she was going to quit her job at a law firm. And the student, who was a transpersonal counseling student, he had been out of school for well over 10 years, which was not uncommon for JFK University students. And in that time, he was a professional dancer on some television programs down in LA, in Los Angeles.
Okay.
So put that aside. We get there, we're met by the mother, her mother, so the grandmother, and this almost 13-year-old boy, Chris. And he then points to the side of him and says, and this is Lois, the name of the ghost, who was the previous owner of the place, who died in a hospital, not in the place, but she had been born in the house and had lived there all her life. So we kind of get taken on a tour of the house. Chris is interpreting what Lois is telling us, which included an enormous number of family stories. So stories of her growing up, stories of relatives, stories of neighbors. And then there was a lot of stuff about the history of the town of Livermore, which I honestly completely discounted because it wouldn't be hard for him to read that in the library. So sure. Skipping all that. So we end up sitting down in a kind of a semicircle around Chris and this empty chair, which is apparently where Lois is sitting. And I asked a few more questions about the family stories. I want to know who will verify this. And actually, the mother, Pat, had been trying to get to this one living relative that she had left behind. It was a cousin who was living in an assisted living place. The house sale was done by an attorney on his behalf because he couldn't do it himself. And I got enough information because the attorney was not helping her at all. Got enough information to be able to track him down and speak to him later on the phone. He was very happy to talk to me when he heard his cousin Lois was still around after death, since he was 90 years old himself. And he not only verified all the stories that I told, but actually completed several of the stories as I started to tell them. So that in itself was secondarily amazing. In the conversation, I asked Lois, about what happened when she died, and she kind of gave a narrative of being in the hospital, reviewing her life, thinking that her family was never religious, so she didn't know if there was a heaven or hell. And she thought, why take a chance? I just want to go home. And the next thing she knew, after closing her eyes in the hospital, was she was in her house. She liked the new family. They had all been seeing her. The day that Pat called me was the reason she called is because Chris had said something to her about some antique dolls that had been part of the sale. And when Pat asked him, where did you learn about these? He said, from the ghosts. Lois, Mom, that Dad and Grandma are also seeing, but you're not talking about? Because none of them had talked to each other about this. I said to Lois, Chris sees you. Why don't the rest of us? And she said she's focused on him and he is very psychically open. She does try to get the others to see her, but they don't ever react to her. They ignore her pretty much.
Can I just jump in quickly there?
Yeah.
How does she try to get people to see her? Do you know what effort or force that she's doing?
I mean, I think it's probably focus, or concentration, if we think of it. She was a consciousness without a body. So it's really kind of the same way that if you do it, you see people doing a telepathy experiment and you could have 5 people there and only one person trying to guess the card you're thinking of. So that's because you're trying to think that card to that one person.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense.
Chris did report that, and this is something not uncommon in apparition cases. Chris reported that Lois would change her clothes. She even appeared to him at different ages, which when I asked about that, she said was that's how she felt that day.
Oh, that's amazing. Girl.
Yeah. And then I finally said, well, then what are you? And this was the great part, and you'll appreciate this. As far as she knew, this is what Chris said, as far as she knew, she was just a ball of energy like some of those aliens on Star Trek.
I do love that. She's just a ball of energy.
So that all came. And then finally, I asked her if she had any questions for us. And this is 1985, early 85. Chris had seen Ghostbusters in the theater. Lois watched TV with Chris, had seen commercials. And the first question, which was not wholly serious, do you guys use the blasters and ghost traps like in Ghostbusters? So I had a very silly answer to that. And then I said, what else? And then he looks over and he says, well, Loyd, what kind of new car do you want? Joanna, do you really want to quit your job at the law firm? And Kip, how long were you a professional dancer?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
and that blew your mind, didn't it?
Yeah, it totally blew my mind. We went through the only other possibility, really, well, 2 possibilities. One, Chris was an amazing psychic and was reading our minds, which there was never any other indication of that. And the other is they bugged my car, but they had no motivation. They were not going for anything. This was really more about Chris growing up. And then when I asked, how does she know this? Is she reading our minds? Chris was a little hesitant to tell us that apparently she got to the university, got in the back seat of our car, and kind of listened in on our conversation on the ride back. So she was a hitchhiking ghost.
That story is super amazing. It raises so many questions and thoughts. And so I'm going to ask you a couple of questions on it now.
Sure.
So the ball of energy thing, is that basically what everyone's seeing? The orbs?
No.
Is that what you...
No, not at all. Not at all. No. The orb phenomena, first of all, people don't see orbs and if they see the orbs, everybody sees them because they're earth lights. They're plasma effects. They're natural effects. They have nothing to do with spirits. Okay. The orb phenomena started in the mid-1990s because of a group called the International Ghost Hunter Society. The guy running it, Dave Oster, declared on some ABC News program when he was being interviewed around Halloween, he was getting these pictures with these round shapes on them, which he called orbs, and he declared that those were spirits. And his whole the whole International Ghost Hunter Society was heavily promoting that idea that these pictures were of ghosts, to the point where they were getting a huge number of memberships where people wanted access to the orb library. People submitted pictures and all of that. The problem was that there were several things that went on at that time. These are photographic effects with almost without exception. For one thing, just looking at them makes no sense because, an orb is actually like a round sphere. And if I take a photograph of a baseball or a crystal ball, you can tell that that was a 3-dimensional object. Whereas when you look at the orbs on these pictures, they're flat. They're completely flat. They're also they show up almost always and only with flashes, the flash. In the 1990s, not only did we go to digital cameras, start having digital cameras, which themselves have some issues, but the flashes got significantly more powerful than they ever had been, than the flash cubes and other things people have been doing. The focal length on the camera was such that dust in front of the lens, insect in front of the lens, or any reflective or semi-reflective surface that the flash could reach out of range of the, I mean, you see a little square around me right now, a little rectangle. You don't know what's on like this side of me or this side of me,
No, I
right?
don't.
There could be mirrors over here on either side. So anything semi-reflective, depending on the angle, could actually cause a flashback or an orb kind of image in that case. Yeah. So, my colleague in the UK, Steve Parsons, is a real expert on this subject. Actually, he's written a few papers, and I know he has a book coming out called Parasite, SIGHT, which will really deal with photographic effects as well. But there are clearly good examples of why this is photographic. And in fact, Fujifilm, after all this became popular in the late 90s, they had a page on their website for a long time explaining how orbs are created. So that's the film company, the camera company.
No, that's cool. So it's still interesting though, in that this, she is saying she is a ball of light or ball of energy, whatever we want to call it.
Yeah, and I don't know if ball, she could have said, she said ball, but for all we know, it could have been blob shape. I don't know that she's looked herself in the mirror, so it's hard to say.
Do you have, or do we have photos then of that phenomenon?
No.
Or is it just can't be done, do you think?
Well, here's the problem is apparitions in general, whatever form they're in, they're not an optical phenomenon. They're not reflecting light and they're not giving off light. And that's pretty clear because otherwise everybody would see them. It's not that one person's eyes are geared to seeing ghosts and another person's aren't. We very clearly established that there is no evidence that they are an optical phenomenon. So in order to take a photograph, there's only two possibilities. One, you're either reflecting and giving off light or reflecting light. Something has to happen that way. Or the apparition would affect the device, affect the camera. To put an image on the film, to put an image in the digital media, to actually affect things. That's actually, when we talk about electronic voice phenomena, the very definition of EVP is that the spirit has affected the device and created the voice in the device. It's not an acoustical sound.
Not in the airwaves,
Right.
Interesting. So what that throws up further speculation, and I know you will have gone through this, that the apparition then technically isn't in our dimension, so to speak. It's slightly out of phase or slightly elsewhere, and therefore it can't be affected by photons or something.
That's a possibility, but I mean, I don't know that that's really the case because light is in our dimension. Forms of there are forms of energy are in our dimension, in our universe. So the question then is really just what is that ball of it? Is it really energy? I mean, that's what she interpreted. We don't know what consciousness is made out of. That's the kind of the hard question and soft question in science right now is what's consciousness? Is it in the body at all? So without knowing what that energy is, without knowing whether it's, I remember reading a speculation by a science fiction writer that after death, our consciousness, which is in and around us, is like a coherent quantum particle field. Again, that's science fiction.
Yes.
So we don't even know, we're not sure exactly what the mode of information transfer is for ESP for that matter. And really it boils down to us not having the science yet, the physics or biology yet to really know what to look for.
Do we have the questions mapped out? I mean, we don't necessarily have the tools to record or see or do whatever, but do we have all the questions ready to go?
All the questions, no. I'd say no, because, I kind of sometimes think about this as not, if we don't have the information up front or grounding, because what apparitions, what ESP, all of this may not be grounded in the things we think that they're grounded in. Just as an example, in the 1800s, when the word telepathy came into use, the original meaning of telepathy was actually emotional transfer, so feeling at a distance. But it became quickly information in many respects. And people doing telepathy work or doing research on that, as well as everyone else, thought about, well, you got to have someone who knows the information and somebody who gets it. So there's this model of sender and receiver, right?
Yep.
But what else was happening in the late 1800s? We had telegraphy with a sender and receiver. We had radio, wireless, with a sender and receiver. And so very often people talked about telepathy as mental radio. And they started looking in people in brain matter to see if there was like a crystal set or something. In other words, the grounding and model and conception was way off on the process. So we're not there yet. I like to think that the answers are in front of us. I think this is the case with science in general. The answers are all laid out in front of us. It's just we haven't figured out the right question yet.
Yeah. Yeah, makes sense. Or the right approach, if you will.
Right.
I'm still stuck on that ball of energy or light thing, whatever she said. Here's the interesting thing. Do you think she was that thing, that ball, that sphere, but how Chris is perceiving her is as a person? Is that how it works? Or is she projecting?
Yeah. So let's think about this for a minute. I have done this. I used to do a regular kind of run of college lectures every year. So I was on a lecture tour many, many times. So I've lectured to groups at colleges around the United States and even Canada, from like 30 people to 3,000 in one instance. And as I would tell this story, I would ask everyone to close their eyes and get a picture of themselves in their head. And then ask the question when they open their eyes, because most people, not everybody can visualize, but most people can. I would ask a simple question. It's like, how many of you were naked? And other than the occasional guy from a fraternity who was already drunk, everybody said, nobody raised their hand.
Yeah.
I also asked the question, how many of you thought of yourself or visualize yourself down to your feet? Because what's really interesting is that most people don't. Most people kind of go down to right above or below the knees when they're thinking of themselves. And many, many apparitions that are seen as a form, they're clothed. They look younger than they did when they actually died, sometimes better than they did. Certainly they're not the 95-year-old guy who died. They're the 30-year-old guy who was 95 when he died. And they see themselves down, the ghost is seen down to about kneecaps, somewhere around there. However, about 5% typically of every audience would say, yeah, I saw myself down on my feet. And then I asked the second question, keep your hands up. How many of you buy a lot of shoes? And it turned out that most of them bought a lot of shoes, which meant that their sense of fashion and dress went all the way down.
I see what you mean. Yeah, that makes sense.
So in the case of Lois and even other apparitions, we have another long-term case where a medium gave the apparition, who'd be seen only in a bright blue dress circa 1930 when she died. That's the only time she'd been seen. This medium from Japan, and when we were shooting a Japanese TV program, showed her stuff in a fashion magazine, which honestly was very surreal. And 2 weeks later, we didn't tell anybody at the restaurant. 2 weeks later, I got a call from one of the waitresses who had seen her very often and said she changed her clothes. She's wearing a short black cocktail dress. What did you guys do? And since that time, she's actually not been seen wearing anything like she used to wear. She wears more modern fashions, because the psychic, the medium, told me that she explained how she could change her clothing, which was just simply think of yourself differently.
That is amazing. And the whole thing down to the knee, you've just slot something into place for me. I've heard that across many, many interviews with many, many people. Yeah, you see him down to the knee, or, just above the waist or whatever. That makes perfect sense. I do love that. That is amazing. And we're going to circle back to one other thing, which is, it's almost like she chose on her death to not go to the light, or whatever we'll call that. Right. She chose out of fear, presumably, to then reattach to this place. And she chose home. Do you think that's what it is always with all ghosts? Then they're choosing not to move on?
Well, that's a good question. In the cases I've had and looking in the literature and talking to psychics and mediums who have had conversations with, and witnesses, actually talking to a lot of the witnesses, there are a number of reasons why the apparition will say they're still there. And fear is one of them, fear of what's next. Interestingly enough, occasionally we hear, I didn't see the light. There was no light. I didn't know what to do next. So they didn't know what to do. The light thing is somewhat pop culture again. It comes from near-death experiences. So what we think is going on here, first of all, if it was a choice, we would have a lot more ghosts. We would have a lot more apparitions. I mean, that's pretty clear, because there are an awful lot of people who are afraid of going to hell. There are an awful lot of
Yes,
people
yes.
who are not sure about what's next. And if it was their choice, we'd likely see a lot more. So we think what's going on is, first of all, that intense psychological reasoning that's there, kind of something emotional or psychological. The other is something in the environment. Over the years, we found some connections to the Earth's magnetic field and psychic experience, psychic abilities. And it seems that there may actually be something when psychics talk about the conditions aren't right. There may be something to that
Mm.
for people to stick around. So we're always looking to try to see if there's any environmental correlations. Unfortunately, we don't have those correlations when people die. We only have them like when they're seen much, much later. And then the third possibility is that there may be a spiritual divine plan for, we can't as scientists comment on that, but I have
Mm.
to leave that open because some people believe that, and that may be the case. There may be some reason that is above any of us as to why that person has to stay versus go.
Let's take that reason, this divine reason why they were going to stay as a ghost, out of the equation a second, just to theorize
Mhm.
on something.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Let's theorize that it's a flaw in the system that creates a ghost. Have you ever thought of that before? And then,
Well, somebody who is a proponent of the simulation theory in physics, which I don't really buy into, but
okay.
she said, well, is that, I mean, are ghosts and psychic experiences, are they blips? Are they, mistakes? Are they flaws? And I actually pointed out, well, if we really are in a simulation, maybe that's a feature, not a flaw.
Mm. An extra hidden level, so to speak.
That's right.
Yeah, I like that one as well. One more question on this whole case.
Mhm.
It leads into so many directions before we move on, which is the thinking of yourself in different clothes means you manifest that appearance that way. Do like I remember my face, right? But maybe in 5 years, I might not remember the face as I am right now. So is it an interpreted version of me, or is it an actual in time version of me? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, you consciously, as you are right now, because we have a lot of reasons why we don't remember everything, may not remember what you looked like 5 years ago. And I've got photos of me from um, 20 years ago. I have a lot of television that I've done. So I can picture myself, first of all, my beard is dark. It's not, my hair is dark. So that's one thing I will say is that if I appear as a ghost, I'm going to look a lot younger and probably may even have hair on top of my head. It's
I'm
been a long time
muscly,
since
yeah,
I had.
muscly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the thing is that um, it in some respects any memory is interpreted, but sometimes people have better memory of what they look like than others, and it may be again about the self-image that we have. It's been thought that some ghosts who don't look human might be a self-image of that person, that they don't think of themselves as a human being. We did
Mm.
have one apparition case, which we were able to work with. A guy who he dropped dead on a jogging trail right outside this warehouse, which was where they were, was a interior design warehouse, and people kept on sensing this entity with depression and sadness and all this, and they would see him as a blob. And when I brought in a psychic for this, she communicates with this guy and gets the story. We are able to verify that he did. There was somebody who died right outside. Um, that he didn't know where to go, and he was incredibly depressed, and he thought of himself as a blot on the face of the earth. So that's how people were interpreting what he was thinking of himself.
And that could clearly account for all the myriad of ghost encounters where it isn't a humanoid, like a
It could,
defined
yeah.
human figure. Yeah, that's a.
That's one of the things. Of course, we
Mm.
also create projections ourselves, and that's a whole different area that we look at.
Yeah, that is amazing. Quality, mind blowing stuff. I did have one. Ah, yeah. The other question you raised something in me. Magnetics. We know how the magnetic field works as in relation to the Earth, and we know there's certain spots, presumably, where the magnetic field is more intense on certain geographic locations on the Earth.
Right.
Is there an experiment, or have we done anything to work out, are there more psychics in that region?
So first of all, know that while there are spots that are kind of geomagnetic hotspots and quiet spots,
Hmm.
the geomagnetic field is not static in most places. I mean, there can be
Oh
highs
yeah,
and
makes
lows
sense.
at any given time. Things like earth movements. So here in the Bay Area, we have shifting geomagnetic fields quite a bit because we have a lot of fault lines. Iceland probably the same, especially right
Mm.
now. Um, there also it's affected somewhat by the moon itself. Tidal forces can affect the Earth's magnetic field. There's a number of factors that affect it as well. So there are spots that, interestingly enough, while it may not make someone more psychic, I know of one place in the LA area. I've never been there. One of my colleagues, Barry Taff, went way too many times. He would get sick. He's electromagnetically sensitive. He's sensitive to geomagnetic fields. Other people have gotten sick in this place as well, nauseous walking in. And you read a very high geomagnetic field. It's constant in this spot. A lot of PK activity, a lot of psychokinetic activity, a lot of other psychic experiences. Not only the guy living there, but other people have experienced as well. So it seems that certain spots might supercharge things, whereas the typical shifting of the highs and lows, do kind of affect us psychically in some way, or at least allow us to be more or less psychic in different ways. Serena Roney Dougal, who is a British researcher, her model of that is that it's affecting the Earth's magnetic field, is affecting, and it's the shifting affects our pineal gland, and
Mm.
that regulates serotonin, melatonin, and our body clock and other things. And that's a part of the process, which is interesting when she came up with that. And there is evidence that it does affect that specific gland. That's the third eye, according to
Mm.
many traditions.
Yeah,
So
and
even
interesting the
that's,
sleep thing. Yeah, with it, look what you said with the moon. Obviously, there's a lot of talk, isn't there, about when it's a full moon, there's more and more weird activity and stuff.
well,
I don't
yeah,
know whether
yeah.
we read too much into that, but it makes sense
I,
if it's linked.
I think, I talked to a police officer, and actually a couple of over the years, about that whole effect. And he's basically, one of them actually said, well, the moon is full. You don't need a flashlight to rob somebody's house.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, very
as he put
prosaic
it, it was a lot
explanation.
safer to do that in full moon than other times.
Yes, true. I love that. What scientific evidence has been gathered regarding ghosts that you're aware of or that you've done
Well,
yourself?
the fact is that all we have is witness testimony, subjective testimony, and correlation and corroboration of that witness testimony. Multiple people seeing the same thing um, over time, which is always an interesting thing when you have a long-term case, especially when the people didn't know anything about the history of the place. And on occasion, some of the conversations in the really long-term cases that the apparition might have with a witness or have with a psychic or medium refers back to a previous situation with another witness, which was not recorded necessarily anywhere where anybody could find it. So certainly these
Mm.
days it wouldn't even be on the internet. So when we're talking about phenomena outside the laboratory, because we cannot control the environment and we don't know what we're looking for when it comes to apparitions, all the ghost hunting tech that's out there that everybody talks about, well, this is sensing a ghost. Yeah, it's not. It's not doing it. We've been trying to use environmental sensors when people are having an apparition experience and when they're not, to see if there's any correlation, some pattern that shows up with apparition cases that we can connect to their experiences. And on occasion, we get a few things, but there's been no real consistency because we haven't had that many apparitions willing to cooperate. Let's put it that way.
Mm.
That's a
Yeah.
big problem. So it's really, parapsychology is mainly a social science. We have a lot of models of how the human mind works in psychology, and they don't all have scientific experimental backup at all.
Makes sense. Yeah, no, I understand.
Yeah, so we're trying our best. We'd love for ghosts to be able to work that way. So the best we can do um, is really kind of look at the patterns that have existed in people's experiences going back over 140 years that are in the SPR's record, the ASPR, all the other organizations, and then those of us that are doing things today and seeing if the patterns match. I mean, I think down the road, if it's possible with funding to scan all that stuff into a computer to digitize all the reports, that are out there and use AI to look for patterns,
Mm.
we would probably discover some really interesting things about those experiences and
So what?
possibly look for.
Yeah, you need a billionaire to be the big, giver, don't you, to that project? We need someone to do
That,
that.
yeah, we need somebody who's really, there's a billionaire who's like funding some research now. Uh, Robert Bigelow has been doing some things with that,
Hmm.
but this whole idea, the AI thing is so new. I don't think anybody's really, really considered that as a research project. And it would be a major project to digitize, 100+ years of many, many journals, plus all the reports that are in that are in the archives of the various
Mm.
organizations too. But it would be really interesting to see what comes out of that down the road.
No, I wholeheartedly agree with you. Are there any ongoing experiments that you know of relating to apparitions that might give further insight? So, like, I know you mentioned AI. That's clearly an avenue we can go down. But is there any
Yeah.
like talk of technologies that might be used that you know?
Again, the only thing we can do is bring technology in that is environmental in nature because we don't know what we're trying to detect otherwise. So, as an example, I had a case years ago and it was one of the things we were looking for. And let me step aside for a second. We
Okay.
have found correlations, and one of the reasons why ghost hunters use electromagnetic field detectors is with the hauntings, the residual stuff that's planted in the environment. We have found correlations for higher than background EM fields in those spots. So that's an interesting correlation. It's not wholly consistent, but it does show up in a lot of cases. With apparitions, I like to say that, first of all, you can't detect something unless you know it's there. And if
True.
nobody's seeing the apparition, it's the other problem is if I'm picking up something with an electromagnetic field, if the apparition moves behind me, I'm getting nothing in front of me, but the apparition is like tapping me on the shoulder kind of thing.
Yeah.
So we had a case a number of years ago where there was a couple of things going on in this property, but they had a positive experience with an apparition. They had a negative haunting kind of imprint elsewhere, but they had a woman who was in late 1800s garb who would show up. The couple would see this woman, and the ghost, would walk into their 2-year-old's bedroom, into the room, and the little girl would be giggling and like the ghost wanted to play with kids,
Sure.
basically. And while we were there, sitting and talking about this whole apparition thing, one of the couples said, "Oh, she's here," and the other one, he looks up and he says, "Oh yeah, she's there." And we immediately hear the little girl, and I can see the girl in the crib reaching up for nobody and giggling and laughing. And then the couple says the ghost is walking towards us now. So my colleague and we had 2 EM field detectors. We're going right where they're saying this ghost stands. So I'm putting this thing apparently right in the middle of the ghost. One of them actually said, "You shouldn't do that. It's rude." But I got no unusual reading. However, 3 feet behind where the apparition was apparently going, what they were pointing where she was walking, 3 feet behind, we had a traveling electromagnetic field.
Like a
So
tail.
like a tail. So
Yeah.
I after that case, decided what I was going to do is, number one, find a skeptic. But I wanted a skeptic who was a physicist specializing in electromagnetic fields. And fortunately, I did that through a local organization, the Bay Area Skeptics. I knew several people there. And I met with this guy. And he prefaced by saying, "I don't believe in ghosts. You know that I don't believe." I said, "Yeah, I know you don't." He said, "But let's speculate for a minute." Because I told him everything that happened. He said, "If you imagine that ghosts are something that affects the electromagnetic environment, not electromagnetic themselves, and we're pretty sure that they're not electromagnetic in nature, but if they can affect the electromagnetic field in the area, then what we were picking up was the wake in the field,
Yes. Makes
kind
sense.
of like a boat on a still lake. That is, the boat's invisible. You can see the wake, but you can't see the boat."
Yeah.
And that was a really interesting thing because we've seen that kind of effect since then a number of times, not where the apparition was being pointed at, but right behind or as the apparition was moving through the environment. So again, we don't know what they're made out of, but what they're made out of seems to affect the electromagnetic environment. We're trying to see, is there anything else in the environment? Are there other environmental sensors we can pick up that indicate that there's something happening in the physical environment? And again, we could use funding because there are places that there seem to have active apparitions from time to time. And it'd be great to be able to really blanket the room or blanket the place with sensors that continuously give us information,
Yes.
correlating that to the witness testimony. Because without the witness or psychic or someone saying there's a ghost here, we just have an anomaly.
True, but then if you did blanket the whole area, like a hallway in a big, haunted mansion or whatever, we'll call it that in inverted commas, you'd be able to see a physical path that it took, wouldn't you?
Correct.
That would be ace, because then you could see it going through walls or going into this room, and then everything corroborated. That would be proper.
Yeah, and again, we'd have to corroborate that with what's been reported. We have to then connect it to the actual in the same time what people are sensing.
That is ace. That is definitely a direction to go. I love that one. I'm still stuck on that woman, and I've got some more questions on her. It's sorry about that.
Yeah, she stuck around for quite a long time, by the way.
This is what was going to be my question. Did she like being a ghost stroke apparition?
She liked the family. So I don't know that she actually liked being a ghost. We've put that question to other ghosts, by the way.
And what do they say?
Well, in the case of one of my long-term cases, the question was with a psychic medium I worked with for a long time. In this case, what do you miss about being alive? And the response, because it was actually a very, very silly session we had with a lot of other people. It was very humorous, but the response was sex and food.
I knew you were going to say those two. Yeah, I knew it would be that.
Two things. In Lois's case, we were told by Pat and by Chris that Lois would help him with his homework. She kind of adopted the kid, more or less, adopted the whole family. She had told us, again, through Chris during that session, that if she didn't like the family that moved in, she would figure out what to do next. But she liked the family. Specifically, she bonded with Chris even the first week. And Chris's grades had gotten significantly better, by the way.
He's a cheat, that's why.
Apparently because she was helping. Yeah. He did complain that he had asked her to come to school one day to help him cheat on a test, but she wouldn't do that.
I don't blame him for asking.
Yeah. And then growing up, I was getting reports, because I talked to Pat for a number of years afterwards, that she said, now he was a good looking kid, but apparently he was really popular with girls. And what we learned was he would ask advice of Lois on how to work with. So he was a good kid. He was really respectful. He was growing up as like not only really mature and a really good kid. So it was no surprise he was popular with girls. He had somebody to talk to. We even had him talk to a child psychologist, by the way, before we went in the first time. And with permission of the family, I was able to have lunch with this guy. And it was someone I knew from the university who didn't think about ghosts either way. He didn't care. Mm-hmm. And what he told me after this first session with Chris and talking to Chris about Lois and all that, he said, if all my clients had a ghost like Lois, I'd be out of business. He was the most well-adjusted kid he'd ever met. That's what he said.
That's one hell of a life hack that you've got on your shoulder, isn't it? Having a ghost attached to you.
Yeah, I mean, I said, I wish I had Lois when I was growing up.
Yeah, I think most people will be thinking that right now. Final question on her before I move on to something else and then get drawn back to her. But did she ever mention anything relating to time and her perception of it?
No, but we have asked, we didn't ask that specific question, but that's been asked by mediums and psychics of other apparitions and also witnesses. Again, sometimes I don't have a psychic or medium with me, but if the witness is willing and is not afraid, and then we get that conversation going, like with Chris. So I ask sometimes, where do you go when you're not here? Not in the room, not in the house, or not present, being seen by anybody. And the answer typically is time's not the same for me. So it's just like skipping time to time. And in one instance, I asked if they're sensing the passage of time. And the response was, well, I can see the sun rising and, night and day. So obviously there's a relationship there. But, you don't have a body, so you don't have a body clock. A lot of our sense of duration and time is because of our body clock, because of our bodies themselves. So without that, you'd need, I would assume that you need external, you need to perceive the world around you to know that time is passing in some respects. And that's one thing I should point out is that we talk about ESP. Early on today, I mentioned that people have their psychic perceptions. Their ESP is picking up the ghosts and the ghosts. Well, I want you to think about this. Ghost doesn't have a physical body. How do they see the world? How do they hear anything? How do they sense anything? Because they don't have a body. So they don't have physical senses. And we define in parapsychology extrasensory perception not as a sixth sense. It's not a sense at all. It's a form of direct perception of the environment and of other people. And that's what a ghost is doing, using ESP, non-sensory perception, to perceive the world.
And that's hard to put into a physical picture in your mind, isn't it? Because
for a lot of
we
people,
can't process it. It's
well,
I'm seeing what I see.
I think that's why people talk about second sight or sixth sense. We actually have more than five senses, and our sense of balance is our sixth sense.
Yeah, I always talk about the knowing. Again, I don't know why I'm doing everything in inverted commas today, but there's a knowing which seems to me like a sense. I don't know. It's weird.
It's perception. What you see and what you perceive are not necessarily the same thing.
Right, knowing that ghosts truly exist, because you've seen it, you haven't physically seen it, but you've got all this interaction. What does that tell you about the nature of life and death? What have you surmised?
Well, with the ghost phenomena, and also with the mediums I work with over the year, the evidential mediums that we work with, consciousness, whether it's generated by the brain or it's something comes into the brain, I don't know exactly what that is. Consciousness clearly is capable of getting information from the outside world directly. So what all of this has told me, and some of the other evidence for survival of bodily death, is that consciousness is capable of existing on its own. But once we move on, we really don't know what that other side or that next step, that other dimension, whatever you want to call it, is, where our consciousness goes. It is possible that our consciousness disperses, completely disperses, and that for some people it stays intact. That's possible. I think that makes the disbelievers feel a little better.
Yeah,
but
I was going to say.
I tend to think, we get so much really good evidential information that is not just factual, it's contextual and personality wise, from mediums speaking to people on in the spirit world, so to speak, that there is a next level of existence for consciousness beyond here. I don't know, I'm often asked, what's the afterlife like? And mediums will give you generally a pleasant, often similar to physical reality kind of explanation. And I honestly don't believe that. I believe that it's so different that the spirits in that world, or that existence, can't even describe it in a way that medium could understand. So the medium,
even they're not even using words, are they, for the most part? Sometimes it's
not using words, not yet. So it's like an alien planet with a completely different environment, with a completely different language. So they have to put it in metaphor of what we can understand in that way.
Yeah. It's a mind-blowing topic, but I want to know the answers, and I know you do as well, clearly.
Yeah, I'm just not in any hurry to find out, for sure.
Yeah, not in a death perspective. You just want someone to download that information to you now.
And I get asked all the time, and you'll appreciate this as a Star Trek fan, I get asked all the time, what are you going to do when you die? You're going to be a ghost. And I said, yeah, first I'm going to screw around with the skeptics. And then I'll travel around the Earth a little bit, but I'm going to go out there. I'm a Star Trek fan. I'm going to go out and see what's out in the galaxy. There's no reason why I have to stay here at all, before I move on to the other side.
That's a great plan, by the way. That is, seeing the Earth from outer space would be amazing, and then doing the rest. I think it'd be cool.
Yeah. If we could, and it's pretty clear that apparitions, if they think they're stuck in a house, they're stuck in a house. But we know that many apparitions just travel wherever they feel like. So,
great stuff. Final question on the apparition stroke ghost topic before we move on. If you could speak to any ghost, anyone from history, that they were a ghost, who would it be? To get any question answered you want.
Wow. Well, I can think of a couple of people I knew. So, for one thing, I probably would talk to, there was a researcher named Scott Rogo, who was unfortunately murdered in 1990. Really amazing parapsychologist and knowledgeable. So he would be able to tell me what what was going on pretty well. I would want to talk to Nandor Fodor. I know there's a really silly movie out right now with that character, but he was a pioneer in the poltergeist model. He was a pioneer in parapsychology. He also could put things into really easy terms for everybody. Was a really amazing investigator. I've kind of gotten into a lot of his older work there. And I want to talk to, of course, besides relatives, I want to talk to a man named Martin Caidin, who was a science and science fiction writer. He wrote the book Cyborg, which became the $6 Million Man TV series. He wrote the book Marooned, which became an Academy Award-winning film that predicted the Apollo 13 disaster. And Marty was capable of doing psychokinesis. I got to know him back in the 1990s, became kind of a mentor of mine, but we did a lot of work together. And if anybody knew what was going on with everything, it would have been him.
It throws open this, right? First off, I like the name Nandor Fodor. I think that's a great name, by the way. It's just amazing. Do you think that if you did speak to one of them, would they be allowed? Oh, I hate doing that. Stop doing that. Would they be allowed to tell you the answers?
I think as best they could. I think they would be allowed to tell me the answers to that. Of course, what we really would want to ask, we want somebody who is capable of telling us how to build something to detect ghosts. That would be good.
Yes. Yeah. Amazing. You wrote a book called Psychic Dreaming, and then it had a massively long subtitle part: Dream Working, Reincarnation, Out of Body Experiences.
Not my subtitle, but yeah, that was.
Oh, is it not? It was a long one. It sounds right up my alley. Now, I don't read books, and then that's not because I can't read. It's just I have a weird sort of like dyslexia with contrast, so I don't tend to read books. I do a lot of podcasts and films and stuff, but it's right up my alley. It covers a lot of subjects that I and probably thousands of people are interested in. And let's start with reincarnation, because that's heavily tied with the apparitions ghost phenomenon. To your mind, again, what is reincarnation, and how do we know it's a thing?
Well, in that book, just let you know, it's specifically looking at people who have dreams of past lives. That's specific to that book. But in general, in our field, since 1960, the University of Virginia has been kind of the center of doing research with children who remember previous lives. Originally Ian Stevenson for many decades, now it's Jim Tucker, who's the guy. Erlander Haraldsson, who passed away a couple of years ago at the University of Iceland, was heavily involved in this area as well. So what reincarnation is, of course, it's believed by over 1.5 billion people on the planet that our personality, our consciousness, our soul gets reborn in some form. And there's variations of what that actual form, the physical form is that you get reborn into. So that's the concept. We have these kids 2 to 4 years old who start talking about having been someone else. And then in some of the percentage of the cases, there's enough specific information plus the ability to determine that the family does not have that information to track down the previous personality. We call those solved cases. There are some exceptionally good cases in those instances, often cross-cultural, some very often cross-gender. They're very, very interesting cases that even the people who are true materialists in the field of parapsychology look at that and scratch their heads, and they can't figure out what that is. So I don't know personally. The evidence is easy to find. The University of Virginia's Division of Perceptual Studies has a lot of literature on their webpage. There are several books by Jim Tucker. Jim Matlock is another one who's done research on this. Erlander Haraldsson. Stevenson's work is out there. It's available to people. But there's a lot of other material that's out there on this particular type of research. When you have a 2 to 4 year old suddenly speaking like an adult with a vocabulary they didn't have, behaving in different ways, and then finding out that likes and dislikes, sometimes their food allergies relate directly to the personality that they're claiming to have been, that they might have phobias related to the mode of death of that person who they might have been. You have to really wonder what in the universe is actually going on. People use the word soul because that's a very religious context of things. We like to use the word consciousness, but whether it's someone's consciousness that's being reborn, or whether it's something about memory, that information, like an information, like a flash drive, a sudden download from the cloud that is happening to this child for whatever reason. We're not quite sure what's going on there. The memories tend to fade by age 6. Every once in a while, they'll stick around for longer, but depends on the culture that the child is growing up in as well. But they're really, we ignore the past life regression cases. Because hypnosis is giving a suggestion you had one, and that's in the book as well. There's too much contamination for adults under hypnosis, especially, to consider that maybe it was a past life, but most of the time, if you try to verify that person existed, you can't find any information. And then you find out that some of the descriptive stuff about what they did that day, or what they would, the normal day to day, or what was going on in the world at that time, matches movies and novels, and not actually history in any way.
So but all the good information is then in the younger people.
Absolutely, yeah. There are occasional spontaneous recalls by adults, but again, we just can't rule out what they read or what they saw as they were growing up.
I'm sure you will have heard this case of the young girl who said she was murdered by an axe. Do you know that case?
There are more than a few out there.
Oh, is there? Oh, that's awful, isn't it? Well, It was like she led someone to her body where they found the axe, and then that led them back to the murder.
I don't know that one. No.
Oh, okay. I just wondered if you do, and then you could recite it. But if you don't know that one? What is the best evidence-y case or story that you know on the reincarnation topic?
There are way too many. I'm trying to think of a specific one off the top of my head. Well, I can tell you one that Erlander Haraldson went over at one of our Forever Family Foundation conferences years ago. This was a case in India, in northern India, where a little girl started speaking about having been a man who was killed in riding his bicycle, killed by a truck about 300 miles away. It was actually another village. She actually named the village, in fact. And, in India, a lot of people believe in reincarnation. So this was not an unusual thing. The parents asked many questions. And this was, a lot of stuff was confirmed later on by Haraldson in doing the research. But the girl was able to talk her parents into driving her to this other village 300 miles away, to a house, knocking on the door, which, in our culture, in Western culture, you would never do this ever.
No.
At least you'd call ahead, They knocked on the door. The little girl identified the woman. This is years after the guy died. Identified the woman as his wife. And then identified by name the sons. Now, the little girl talked about this accident, and when they were invited in and talking about this, the wife said, yes, he was riding his bike. His left side was crushed. The little girl had a huge birthmark on her left side that essentially matched the pattern of the injury, something that Haraldson found out. The birthmark thing is in about 15% of these really good cases that we see. So Haraldson was showing us video. He talked about the case, then he showed us video of another visit. He made a visit to India, visited that family when the girl was 12 years old, because of the context of the culture, and because the little girl's family and this other family established a really close relationship. And apparently the sons would call this little girl dad, or the effective term for that. So there was this really interesting relationship which kept the girl's memories intact as the previous personality. The thing that Stevenson determined over the years in general for these cases is that most of these children remembering previous lives, the cases were of people who died traumatically. So maybe not an axe murder, but car accident, or like a real sudden death, real tragic in that sense. And that the average time between the death of the previous personality and the next person was about 15 months before conception. So it would have been 24 months since the death when the kid was born at that point. So that was a common kind of an average in most of these solved cases. There are some that go back decades and a few that were much, much shorter, but always the person died before conception of the next person, of the child, in that sense.
And
So
that
that's
throws open.
one case I knew of.
That's a good case, and there's two things I want to touch on there. That I've not heard this 15-month thing before, by the way. The
Yeah, it's
window
written
of
in
time in between.
a few of Stevenson's books and a few papers. I mean, it's an average. So again, it's the average number.
Yeah. But it throws open the question, which would be why that sort of average time? I know that there's always going to be an average time, but why,
Right.
like, 1.5 years versus 7, or do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it seems well. I mean, it seems like that's fairly close in time to the conception of someone else. So, maybe that has something to do with it. I don't know. We can speculate all we want on that.
Yeah. I know it's an impossible. And the
There's
birthmark
some
one is
mechanism.
the birthmark one is entirely interesting because that's almost like saying physicality has been affected by the mind. It's almost as if when that mind's gone back in to the new concepted life, its trauma has then impacted the physicality of the body.
And we call that
Or it's a clue specifically there.
Yeah, I mean it's psychokinesis. It's mind over matter. It's it's or consciousness over matter in this case.
What other birthmarky ones have you heard of that are outstanding like that one?
There are cases of somebody who was hanged, and there's a rope. There's basically a birthmark that looks like a rope burn.
God.
People who were shot with birthmarks right where the bullets impacted the previous personality. Things like that.
You watch everyone now who's listening to this will be checking for a birthmark on them and wondering.
It only counts if you can connect it to a previous personality.
Yeah.
The problem, and this is the problem with past life regression. Again, somebody goes in for a regression because they want to know if they had a past life or what that past life was, and they might think, well, I have an unusual birthmark, so the story that the consciousness comes up with, their subconscious, in response to the hypnotherapist saying, go back before your birth, you had a past life, it'll match the birthmark no matter what, but then you can't prove anything. So we have to kind of throw those cases out. They may be genuine, there may be some reality to them, but unless we can confirm that you don't know any information about that past personality, especially today with the internet, if people go into well, let's take those dreams. People have a dream of having had a past life, and suddenly they'll start researching, and the dream might have been of an actual memory, past life memory, but now they're researching. Now they're filling their minds with all this other information about the person they might have been. Then they go into a hypnotherapist, and naturally it's going to be fleshed out whether it was a real experience or not. There's a lot of stuff that's coming through that it's not genuine.
There's a lot out there muddying the waters, and I'm contributing that by front loading people with birthmark issues.
Right.
I'll just do this. I'll zip up. I believe reincarnation is real, by the way. I'm bang on board with the whole thing of it. What do you think the purpose it is serving is? I.e., what is the bigger picture?
Well, I mean, if we're talking about, like, there's the karma thing. It may be that these people, their lives were cut short at a time that they weren't ready to go. I'm sure they weren't ready to go at that time. I personally don't believe that we all have a expiration date on us. I don't believe we're fated. In parapsychology, we look at precognition, telling the future, as a probabilistic thing, not as a reading the future definitely. That's pretty clear by so many wrong predictions. So I think that there, in many respects, it may just be that the universe is set up that some people, again, if the conditions are right, some people don't come back as ghosts sticking around haunting because they died tragically, but they're actually able to kind of funnel into somebody else, into something else.
Okay, so let's look at the dream working aspect of that book of yours. You're of the mind that our daily lives can be helped with understanding our dreams. A little while back, I spoke to a lady called Kelly Sullivan Warden, also known as Dr. Dream. You might see her on American TV every now and again. And she was talking about how dreams can help you in your waking life as well. From your perspective, how can dreams help?
Well, our unconscious works stuff out in our dreams from time to time. Dreams are very symbolic. The one thing I'll say is that people should ignore those dream dictionaries, which tend to plagiarize previous dream dictionaries anyway. So we have our own symbology. We have our own symbols and metaphors and things like that. We work stuff out in our dreams. Our brains are incredibly active during the dream state. Neurons are firing all over the place. And the idea of, if you can learn to remember your dreams, you can actually work with them to see what your unconscious is telling you about things that are going on in your daily life, because a lot of stuff is day residue, comes through the frustrations of daily life and things that are happening. You can also program your dreams. There's an ancient Czech technique called dream incubation. The Egyptians talked about this thousands of years ago. The Greeks did it as well. That if you tell yourself that I need to play out asking my boss for a raise tomorrow, how that's going to work. What's the best way to approach my boss? Stuff about your boss unconsciously that you probably don't recognize consciously in that sense. So you can tell yourself, I want to have a dream of playing that out, and just tell yourself that over and over again. The important thing is you have to also tell yourself to remember that dream, because otherwise it's not going to be any good, right? So learning to remember your dreams is part of this process. And what can happen for folks is they can get a role play and think and find the best outcome, and kind of then take that into their daily life the next day. They can deal with relationships in their dreams that way. Plus, our hopes and fears and psychological issues all come out in our dreams. And in a dream group, you can talk about those things, or even for yourself, just jotting that down and going back over the dreams can give you a lot of good information for that.
So do you use this scenario yourself to gain wisdom or whatever?
Once in a while. When I was originally writing the book, and that's the an updated second edition, essentially. When I originally started writing the book, the one thing that was really amazing to me is that I was remembering the entire time I wrote that book, I was remembering dreams at a level I had never done before, because I was focused on that topic. The day I turned in the manuscript, shut off.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
I tell myself for certain things, and I do remember specific dreams. I don't keep a dream journal, which is really the key to continuously working on your dreams. I work on other things, so many other things in the field that that's more than I can do right now. But I do occasionally do a dream incubation, program myself, and make sure I remember that dream. And then if I wake up knowing that dream, I try to record it right away.
Yeah, I think those are good tips. I mean, I'm of one of those people that don't remember dreams a lot. And if it does, you've just come out of a dream, it's gone within 5, 6, 7 seconds,
Right.
That's obviously a skill, learning to keep hold of it and then trying to decipher it.
It's actually recording it right away. And what the interesting thing is, when you start writing down, even the little bit you might remember about that dream, the more you write down or tell someone else, or even speak it into a recorder on your phone, the more you'll actually remember. And so it'll stick around much longer than 5 or 10 seconds. It'll start sticking around a lot longer than that. And you'll be able to kind of continuously, again, you're reinforcing things by writing it down, by saying it, by covering it.
Have you been part of groups and or studies where you've had a number of people together working this process, where they'll all try to aim for success in a certain whatever way, and then they've all proven that they were able to do that? Not necessarily in a financial way, not like a lottery sort of way, but in, I don't know, an improvement of self, whatever.
Well, yeah, I've sat in on a few dream groups over the years, especially in the 80s and 90s. One of the folks I interviewed for the book, Montague Ullman, who was one of the 2 researchers in parapsychology who did extensive dream telepathy experiments in the 1970s. Ullman pretty much brought and popularized a Swedish method of dream work with groups talking about things. And that has really, looking at that, people get a direct benefit out of that. There's also a researcher named Gail Delaney here in San Francisco, who came up with she's written a lot of books on dreams, and came up with a really interesting way of knowing what your dreams mean, or figuring out what those metaphors actually happen to be. And it actually connects directly to psychic experience, and it connects to remote viewing in some ways and other areas. And that is that she said, whatever you remember from the dream, you need to actually not name it. In other words, jot down descriptions, not names of items, not categories of things. So for example, if in a dream I saw something that otherwise, if I saw it, I would call it a banana. I'm not going to call it a banana. She said, pretend like you're a Martian and you've never seen that banana before in your life. You know words like yellow and color and shape, but that's all, and
Yeah.
function. So write all that stuff down. And what ends up emerging from that is suddenly that banana means something completely different to you, certainly different than what it says in some of these dream dictionaries. And that might directly give you some benefit as well.
It's all in the interpretation, isn't it?
Well, human beings are hardwired to name things, to
Mm.
categorize. And unfortunately, as soon as we see something partial, we name it and fill in the blanks. And one of the things that comes up for developing psychic ability or noticing that you're already psychic, besides the noticing part, this is something that remote viewers and people who do any sort of psychic work have to learn to do, is that we know that ESP sometimes brings partial information, so partial picture. So think about this as you've got a jigsaw puzzle, it's not completed. There are pieces missing, sections missing. But if you guess at what it said, what it looks like in the end, that fixes that image in your mind, even though the pieces that are missing, when you put them in there, give you a completely different picture. So for example, if you have a dream about something, or if you're doing remote viewing and you get a picture of essentially a steel tower made of steel construction, there are crossbars, and it starts wide at the bottom and goes up towards a much narrower part at the top. I don't see the top, but I see a much narrower part to the top. The way, and I've had people say this, things like this, they'll say, well, that's got to be the Eiffel Tower. And yet what it really was a tower holding power lines, which looks very similar. It doesn't come to the top, not as tall. Certainly it's not the same color, but the shape is generally the same as the Eiffel Tower. We look for familiar imagery and we name it, and suddenly the image fixes in our mind that that's what that is. And we have to back away from that, because we may be describing something that is completely different. As soon as we name it, we have to toss out that additional information.
So we're fighting ourselves, essentially.
We're fighting our programming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which does not help in any way, shape, or form.
No, we have to, we basically, I mean, what I like to say to people is, if you were blind all your life and somebody says, okay, and you get sight all of a sudden, right? Maybe you've been told the sky is blue and you're seeing blue for the very first time in your life. But if you hadn't seen anything, I mean, you just simply open up with sight and you're looking around, it's like, without any context, you wouldn't know that something is blue versus black or white.
Yes, correct.
Because you don't have the words. But as soon as you have those words attached to a thing, you're kind of
related. Yeah, and that makes complete sense. Moving slightly ajar or aside, do you think we'll ever be able to record dreams and thus revisit to analyze perfectly without memory being involved?
I know, there's technology that's trying to actually interpret signals in the brain right now, and there's been some success in that. I suspect that someday we'll have a much better way of reading people's minds that way, but I don't know if we'll ever be able to fully get the dreams. We'll probably have ways of increasing people's memory of those things, of dreams, so that we'd be able to, maybe dream recall can be enhanced in some way, certainly in altered states of consciousness. There may be ways of actually helping that along. I don't know about actually recording people's dreams. Although recording the impulses, knowing when somebody dreams, once we have a dictionary to be able to do that and turn into words, we might be able to get, probably not pictures, but possibly some concepts and words and things like that. It's the stuff of science fiction, of course. A lot of sci-fi comes true at some point in time. I just don't know if we're anywhere near that.
Star Trek, that's what it's like, the old flip phone. It all works. I'd love to see that, but I don't think I'll ever see that in my time. But hey,
and by the way, I should show you a little something here, because I think you'll appreciate
it. Go for it. I can see you got a number of good things on the shelf. Oh, eh? The
So
Next Generation tarot deck.
Star Trek affecting the paranormal the other way around. Yeah.
Love me the
Actually,
Next
I haven't read the
Generation.
Star Trek.
Is that your series, by the way? Next Gen. Do you prefer that, or do you prefer original or DS9?
At this point, I think that I love all the Star Trek series. Deep Space Nine was my favorite series for a while,
Mine too.
but now it's Strange New Worlds without question.
I like Strange New Worlds. I still don't think it touches DS9 and TNG for me,
Yeah.
but it's certainly a lot better than the other recent crud they've
Oh
been
yeah.
putting out, trying to call Star Trek. Anyway, ESP Wars. What's that book about?
So ESP Wars I co-authored with Edwin C. May, who was the program director of the U.S. government's Stargate program. That's the not the transport to other planets. That's the program looking at remote viewing that started in 1972. Victor Rubel, who was a co-author with us, who was our connection to the Russian side of things. Joseph McMoneagle, who was the #1 viewer for the Stargate program, for the Army project. And the book is a history of our government program from the inside. So Ed was involved with the program from 1975. It covers the program's development, a little bit of politics, quite a bit of politics actually in there. The successes of the program. Joe provides a perspective from the viewer side of things. There's a history in there of psychic spying going back centuries that I wrote up. And then we have contributions from the Russian researchers who Joe and Ed got to know with Victor in the 1990s into the 2000s. And some of these guys were involved. In fact, 2 of the main researchers were also military, and they were ex-KGB. They were in the KGB when they did research. So the book actually covers our program, why it got started, the successes and failures, why it shut down, although we've got more information about the shutdown later on. And then the Soviet program, why that got started, their successes, how it differs so much from what we thought the Soviets were doing back in the 1970s. In fact, there's a lot of really interesting ideas or information from the Russians about how much propaganda was directed at the Kremlin internally. So we picked up on that. I mean, there was a book called Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain with all sorts of claims that the Russians were giving the Soviets were giving at that time, that they were developing psychic weapons and psychic generators and all this stuff. Yeah, none of that worked. They had success because they kept, apparently, according to Alexei Savin, one of the generals, in order to keep the programs alive and people out of gulags, because apparently there was a parapsychologist who said, can't do this, and he was thrown in jail by the Kremlin. So they basically said, we're still working on it. We're having success. It's not quite ready yet. And it was that kind of thing. There's actually some fun KGB stories in there too. But if you can imagine, there were fun KGB stories.
Yeah, they got to have fun at some point, haven't they, in their lives?
Yeah, when I was brought into the project and going over everything, kind of helping form stuff and then adding to it as well. It was, honestly, I was blown away by some of the KGB stuff, which is so not what we've heard before. But I have no doubt that it's true because it just rings too true for things. So
let's quick before we go into some of these bits. Can you just give us what you would define as remote viewing? What it is?
Yeah. So we define extrasensory perception in different ways, kind of different applications, right? People know the word telepathy, picking up information that might be in somebody else's other mind or emotion. There's the term clairvoyance, which psychics have kind of muddied the waters on, but that's real-time ESP. So I pick up information from something hidden from my normal senses in real time. Precognition is knowing it before it happens. So it's still hidden from my normal senses, from guesswork and all that, but that's through time. So remote viewing is essentially real-time ESP, but instead of a target where it's in an envelope that's in front of me, it's a deck of ESP cards, it's in the next room or even the next building, the target is unknown to me and it's distant, so it's remote. Right, and that's the key to remote viewing. And it's really remote perception, because some of the viewers, as we call them, pick up things sound-wise. They pick up auditorily. They pick up things feeling. They'll feel like the temperature at the place. They'll sense other things going on. So it's really remote perception, but remote viewing makes much more sense for a
Yeah.
lot of people in that way.
So it's the same as the whole psychic scenario where, like you said earlier, one person can see, hear, blah, smell.
Right,
This
right.
just at a distance.
Right, and it's at a distance, and in fact, when one of the things that Ed May loves to talk about is that Alexei Savin, when he and Joe were over there, they met a number of the remote viewers over there, all Army people. They'd all been trained to do remote viewing. Some of them had been assigned to the tanks in Chechnya during the Chechnyan conflict, and their function was, as the tanks are rolling along, they want to make sure they're not going to get hit with a rocket around the corner of a building. So they
Yeah,
would
okay.
try to remotely view in real time who was around the corner, where they get ambushed and stuff. And Ed's flat out, like deadpan response to the general was, "What about 40 feet is remote?"
Yeah.
So, I hear people saying remote viewing if they know what's in a box in front of them. That's not remote.
No.
It's real-time ESP, and we've kind of gotten it's these popular terms. But remote viewing is something that everybody can do to some extent. We actually scan the environment as we're moving around, but we just normally don't use that information or recognize that information because we have our normal senses, which are actually pretty good.
Mm. Now that tank thing, presumably that was knocked on the head because you don't see a crew member in every tank these days, do you? That is a remote viewer. So what
No,
came of that?
yeah, I mean that group, they were in a number of tanks in Chechnya, according to General Savin, and to Boris Ratnikov, another one of the generals. Um, they stayed with the program, and they basically do remote viewing. A lot of it's law enforcement, according to Savin and Ratnikov. A lot of that, what they did would be internal law enforcement in the Soviet Union, in Russia, actually, in Russia. With today's political climate, I know that there's not been as much contact with those folks right now. So
No, it makes sense. Do from the research done for that book, how did like the Americans versus the Russians um differ in terms of like training to do the task? Was it very
training
similar or
apparently,
completely
yeah,
different?
yeah. Well, the program got started in 1972. Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff were the main folks there. The person who did the training, or kind of like was the mentor for everybody, was Ingo Swann, who
Mhm.
was an amazing psychic. He often did out of body work. In fact, going back to traveling out of your body or being a ghost and leaving the planet, he wrote a book called To Kiss Earth Goodbye, where when he was out of body, he went to Jupiter and Saturn and described features of the planets that were dismissed until Voyager got there a couple
He,
years
he
later.
he discovered the rings, didn't he?
He found the rings of Jupiter, the minor ring of
Hmm.
Jupiter, but also that the structure of the rings of Saturn being kind of braided together in many respects. He also described a number of other features as well. But Ingo was involved in selecting the folks. They brought in a couple thousand different people that had come to the attention of the armed forces, who had unusual experiences. They were really lucky in the field. I mean, one of the things Joe McMonagle, he had a couple near-death experiences over in his life, but when he was in Vietnam, he would lead his team, um, and they would avoid the Viet Cong like without any problem, because Joe would use his instincts and his perceptions, kind of like completely avoid things in that way. So they had these folks, they did some testing with them, they whittled them down to 60 people, did a workshop with Ingo, whittled it down to the initial 6 that were there, who seemed to have a natural aptitude for this idea of picking up information at a long distance, partly about being able to get out of their own way, again, not name things, not judge things in themselves, again, because of this programming we have to immediately judge things and name things. So they started with those folks, and the training was really more about letting yourself be psychic. The basic form of remote viewing is really getting out of this idea of naming, finishing a picture, knowing that if you draw some elements in a picture, you're seeing something over here and something over there. Maybe it's all part of the same thing, but don't try to make it fit. describe the jigsaw puzzle pieces, not the jigsaw puzzle itself, the end result, that kind of thing. So that's really the basic training that they've gone through. Then there's practice. And I know Joe, I just spoke to Joe last week. Joe practices. He does remote viewing 3 or 4 times a week. Even if he doesn't have somebody giving him a task, he'll still do it, set up experiments to do that, because he wants to keep sharp with that in that respect. In the program, there was a request from the CIA, and the program actually started out being overseen by the CIA, but over time it had oversight from the Defense Department in general, from DARPA, from other agencies in the federal government, and eventually back to the CIA. At one point, the CIA, when they were not overseeing it, asked for a training program, for Ingo to develop a training program that they could train their agents, their field agents with. And Ingo, knowing that these field agents were very left-brained, very logical and stuff, came up with this thing called coordinate remote viewing, which is a very, very lengthy left brain process. It could take 6 hours to do a single remote viewing, as opposed to 20 minutes to sit down and do it. And unfortunately, it didn't work very well. They were not able to really train people to do this. So that was shelved within the program. Although that's the kind of remote viewing that many people who either were or claimed to have been part of the program teach people, because they can charge a lot of money for it.
Yeah, that's the one I always hear about, is the coordinates in an envelope one.
And it works for, if you have an aptitude for it. What happens is, and I've talked to people who've taken some of these programs, and actually Ed has got a lot of complaints from people, even though he feels for them. They pay $3,000 for a program, they can't do it. Well, because they didn't have the aptitude. Psychic ability, you can't do everything. Even the best psychics can't do everything. So you have to figure out what you're good at, and remote viewing may not be what you're good at. So there are some people who can do really, really well at coordinate remote, or controlled remote viewing is what it's called, CRV, but it's not for everybody. I and Ed and others have found that kind of sitting down, and after you teach people to get out of their own way, more or less, a lot of people can do it pretty well.
Have you had success?
Yes, I have, from time to time.
Can you tell me something you've
And
done?
I have my students do it. I mean, I was just doing an experiment. So for myself, somebody else chose a target and I described it fairly well. So I've done that from time to time. So it's, and then there's also something called associative remote viewing, where the purpose is actually to predict something in the future. You're going to predict feedback you're given. So it might be that you're shown that the actual task is connected to the stock market going up or down, or a specific stock going up or down. And all you're told as the viewer is, tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., I'm going to hand you a piece of fruit. And it can be an orange, or it could be a banana. I just want you to focus on what piece of fruit I'm going to hand you tomorrow. And I tell them it's going to be an orange. And unbeknownst to me, or even the guy who's going to hand me the fruit, that orange means the stock market's going up. So the next day, when the stock market either goes up or down, whichever happens, if it goes up, then that person's going to be told to give Loyd an orange. If it goes down, give him a banana, which means I'm wrong. And folks like Paul Smith and some other folks have made some good money at doing that, doing associative remote viewing.
Swines. Well, they're not sharing that with me or you, are they?
They're not making a lot of money. They're being very careful about how they do that. The problem we've seen before on occasion, it's even happened in the 80s with a group where the investors, the people who wanted the thing to happen, they got greedy and really put a lot of pressure on the viewers, and it just went away.
Yeah, that's telling you something about the wider picture or something. That's what
it's the emotionality
towards.
Of that. Yeah,
Yeah. So did the Russians then sort of like learn this from what came out later? Did they learn in a similar vein to how the Americans did?
Apparently, they did.
The same path.
A lot of trial and error, and it's hard to know how much. Here's the thing, that even though we had a secret government program starting in the 70s, Targ and Puthoff were actually doing other experiments with remote viewing, not anything to do with the government stuff. and publishing those papers. So was Ed May later on, and so were several others, Stephen Schwartz and others. So the successes of the more public stuff may have actually given the Russians some tips
Yeah.
on how to do things. And then, you can just make assumptions the other way around as well.
Do you know of any stories whereby your guys, the Americans, were remote viewing their remote viewers, and then they were, remote viewing each other?
Interesting you mentioned that. No, they haven't done that. But it's something that working with someone named Keith Harari years ago, one of the researchers, we came up with an idea that should happen. We should set up an experiment like that, because we think that'll actually kind of create a feedback loop, which might make things better. So
a forever loop.
One day, I actually have a TV proposal from the 1990s to do a international remote viewing with 3 or 4 remote viewers in different continents viewing each other in succession on live TV. Which
that'd be good, wouldn't it?
When Joe McMoneagle and other viewers had been in a live session on TV, the amount of information and the success rate goes up dramatically, which is really mind-blowing when they're on TV.
That's weird, isn't it? Because you'd think it'd go the other way.
Well, you would think that, except that think about what television is. Television is remote viewing.
Yeah.
So I think that the whole idea of that is itself supportive of the concept. I've talked about this with one other researcher about it, but I think it's a great idea, and I at some point I'll pitch it to Ed again. He hasn't done that yet, but we'll do that.
That same billionaire from earlier, we need him on this one as well.
It doesn't cost much to do a remote viewing experiment, actually. The experiment itself, the TV production might cost more.
But that's what I mean, yeah.
But one of the things Ed May has discovered is that with precognitive remote viewing, so what that means that I'm going to do a viewing right now of where you're going to be in 2 hours, okay? And you have not even determined that. So after I do my viewing and take my notes, I don't even show you the notes. You have maybe a whole bunch of things in envelopes of locations. You randomly grab one, you go to that location at that appointed time, and basically I'm connecting with you in that future time. Yep. So the location hasn't even been chosen until after I do the viewing. If that's done, where instead of saying where you're going to be, but in 2 hours, someone is going to select a location for me to go to, and I'm told, view where we're going to take you in 2 hours. And then after I do the viewing, they do the selection and they take me to that location. When that has happened with Joe McMoneagle and other folks, where they are the person, they're viewing themselves in the future, that has provided much, much better quality response than if they're just told, I'm going to select a location in the future where so-and-so is going to be at that location in the future.
And what does that suggest to you?
That we're connecting with ourselves through time.
Yeah.
Or that maybe that what's going on is we're picking up the feedback we're going to get, not the location.
It's the remote viewing one is the most mind-bending of all to me. Now, the most intriguing piece of information I heard on this topic was regarding Ingo Swann, and you'll know what it's going to be. It's that where he remote viewed the moon and supposed alien bases. What do you think of that?
Yeah, much later in life. Yeah.
What do you think of that whole scenario? And could you just give us a synopsis of that event?
Yeah, I know that there's a book out there on that. I haven't read the book, and I know that Ingo, and much later in his life, found moon bases of aliens on the moon. There are other. Let me back up for a second. I had a colleague of mine by the name of Marcello Truzzi, who was actually a skeptic in the sense, and in the truest sense of the word. He was someone who didn't know if ESP, if this stuff existed, but he was also a great supporter of psychics working with police, because he had direct records that he had pulled. He had interviewed police who had worked with psychics, that they actually were useful. Not all of them, but some of them were very, very useful. And he said, it doesn't matter if it's ESP or if their brains are wired differently, look at the evidence in a way that none of us could conceive of. It doesn't matter. They're useful. So he was a supporter of that, and a supporter of parapsychological research. He noted, I was having a conversation with him about a psychic who, over about 15 years that I knew this guy, he was already 65, 70 years old when I first talked to him. And as he got older and older, he started going more towards started talking about reptilian aliens and picking up stuff on other planets. And it was an evolution that apparently Marcello noted in several other elderly male psychics, not female psychics, but elderly male psychics. So whether they're picking up on a completely different reality or something real is hard to know. So I don't know what to make of that piece of it. I know that Ingo in his earlier days was right on, but if he fell into the pattern of these same other psychics who started, finding all sorts of weird stuff, even in places where we could verify that they were not there. So
I see.
hard to say.
Yeah, it was an interesting read when I did read that one anyway.
Well, and somebody else, I'll just tell you, somebody else
Go
suggested
for it.
that maybe they're picking up on a different reality. They may not picking up on our moon. We talk about the multiverse and different.
Oh God, yeah.
So,
oh, that's even more mind bending.
Yeah.
Well, I'm for one. If psi wasn't real in this remote viewing aspect, well, I mean, why would governments around the world invest in it heavily and stuff?
Well, there's
tells you
that.
a story.
And actually, the investment wasn't that much. It was $22 million in over 23 years, which is a drop in the bucket compared
Yeah, I
to how many
suppose.
toilets they buy for the Pentagon.
Always gold toilets.
Yeah. And the thing is that what Ed would always say, I think it was 21. So 21 federal agencies came to the group to task them with something. 17 of those 21 agencies kept coming back. Why would they keep coming back if they weren't getting good information?
Of course, yeah. There's something to all of this stuff that we've talked about tonight. I wish more people would be open to it. I don't know why I need to have their validation, but it's just nice to have more people.
The fact is that these people's experiences in this, forget about the programs. People have experience with ghosts, with ESP, with psychokinesis, and this is going back thousands of years, and there are recorded experiences all over the world, and they relatively stick to the same patterns. The very fact that mainstream science immediately dismisses them, and especially psychologists really dismiss them, is not scientific. I mean, if you really were interested in science and being scientific, you would put a lot of resources to maybe find an alternate explanation to the one that parapsychologists have.
Yes.
Because maybe there is one, and we're not going to find it because we don't have enough funding or people. And we're also approaching things from a slightly different perspective. So it would be helpful if a lot of people came in. And one of the best examples is the kids who remember previous lives. I mean, even the materialists in my field who don't believe in soul or anything like that, they're fascinated by these cases. And there should be significant research. I've talked to psychologists who are like, well, the kids are just making it up. It's like, you have no idea.
Yeah, they're just throwing that out there as the dismissive, aren't they? Rather than
it's like the mass hallucination. If 3 people see a ghost at the same time, it's like, well, show me the evidence for mass hallucination. I'll be happy to look at it.
I hate that explanation, mass hallucination. I had that with a conversation with somebody yesterday. I don't believe in it.
Just ask them for the science. Where's the science behind that? Because it really isn't.
Prove it to me. Yeah, you can't. Let's talk briefly about the current state of psi research before we enter the Koit zone. How far are we along with the public at large then to opening their eyes to the existence of psi?
Honestly, I think we're a little further behind than we were in the 70s. Partly because the experts that keep on talking are often the academics in the I think the UK, you're a lot farther along than we are in terms of the public than we. Plus, there's a tradition in the UK as well. In the US, especially in the climate we have right now, the only area where people might be more open to it, and of course they don't even talk about it as much necessarily, is the ghost, what people call the paranormal, apparitions, hauntings, that sort of stuff. There have been surveys by real estate companies during the lockdowns during the pandemic, and a lot more people thought their house was haunted. Although there are explanations for that. We actually know why that happened. And it had nothing to do with the paranormal at all.
Was it more because they were at home more?
They were at home. They were at home and never had heard this. They were home, locked in their houses for weeks on end, and they had never heard those sounds before.
Yes,
because they never noticed them. Yeah. So it's really, I think that many people I talk to are more open to talking about it. But the moment you bring in anybody who's an academic in general, even into the room, it tends to dampen everything right off the bat, because those folks tend to be very dismissive unless they know who you are. So, for example, myself and I know several of my colleagues have been at conferences or places where there have been a group of people from some science group or some other university, and they immediately say, "Oh, this is all woo-woo, this is all crap." And then separately, later on in the day, one at a time, they'll come over and tell you their experience, their psychic experience or their ghost experience. You know, they're unwilling and afraid of that. So that kind of suppression, the skeptics organizations being as active as they are, and frankly, a lot of the bad stuff that's happening, bad information coming from ghost hunting groups. You know, people dismiss stuff because they see, because the average person who doesn't necessarily believe or disbelieve in this stuff sees this TV stuff as, we know reality TV is not, you know, that's not real. You know, they're acting like idiots. They feel something, they go running, screaming from the house. That's why people watch those shows.
Oh yeah, I can't stand that. Yeah.
So it's opened people up. There's over 3,000 ghost hunting groups in the United States at this point that have active websites. There's a lot more that don't have active websites. So there's more and more people that are tending toward this, but most of them, because they're following what they see on these paranormal reality shows, don't have any awareness that there actually is research in parapsychology. They don't have any awareness even that, unless they hear from people like me, that what they're doing connects to our field. They don't even know about the history. In fact, one of the guys from one of the main TV shows here, the Ghost Hunters, on a panel I was on in 2008 at a fairly large paranormal conference in Pennsylvania, made the statement on the panel that there was no literature in the subject before the 1990s, which I corrected immediately. I was very rude and interrupted him and corrected him. Fortunately, somebody else backed me up because I had a lot of haters in the crowd after that, because I unfortunately interrupted their hero from TV.
But this is the point. Surely people with the information, such as yourself, you should be the people that are lauded up because you are actually looking at it in a grounded way and not doing all the fluff stuff.
Right, which is why I do podcasts like this, honestly.
Yeah.
And why
we celebrate the wrong people.
Yeah, well, I mean, honestly, one of the few ghost conferences I went to, they were more like old Star Trek conventions than they actually were conferences talking about the stuff. It was the celebrities talking about their experiences on the shows.
Rather than the knowledge being the celebrity.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Dumb. Slightly sideways question, but I wanted to throw it in here quickly before we do the Koit zone. Who, in your opinion, from history or alive today, do you consider to be the greatest medium of all time?
Boy, from a strictly mediumistic perspective of like communication, I'd say probably the one who has been in our history who was never attacked by skeptics and subjected herself to a lot of research was Eileen Garrett.
That's not a name I've heard of before.
Yeah, Eileen Garrett was the 40s, 50s into the 60s. She founded the Parapsychology Foundation, an educational organization. She worked with researchers quite a bit. Eileen Garrett is kind of like a big mark there. From a physical mediumship perspective, I'd have to say probably Daniel Douglas Hume, from what we hear from the reports. We have a lot of great mediums today as well, but those are the two I'd probably name.
Thank you for that. It just gives me some avenues to go and investigate, so I much appreciate that.
Yeah, actually, I'll just mention that Eileen Garrett wrote actually the first book on psychic fraud. She wrote a book called The Sense and Nonsense of Prophecy, distinguishing the two, the real stuff from the fraud. So if you can find a copy of that book, I highly recommend it.
I will certainly look her up, and then I'm sure I will see that on my travels. It's a question now I ask every single person I interview. Now, it's going to be slightly different for you because you will have come across a lot of strange things. But what strange things have happened to you? It doesn't have to be a ghost. It could just be a random weird person in your life. It could be seeing a UFO, could be anything. Just give us a story of a strange thing.
Okay, a strange thing. I'm just trying to think of which direction to go in for this.
Well, I like it. If it comes to your mind, it's the right one.
Okay, well, the one that popped in my mind, which people shudder at sometimes, is this long-term case that I did at the place called the Moss Beach Distillery it's a restaurant in Northern California outside of San Francisco. I've been working at the place, doing kind of a continual investigation since 1991. And I was with a small team, and we were given permission to be on after hours 2 nights in a row on a weekend. And we started out actually with my colleague Annette Martin, the psychic and medium I worked with for many years until her death. She had communicated with the ghost many times, and we did a session with her. And so here's a little, there are two strange things that happened that weekend. One, we asked the ghost through Annette about the history, because the event that killed her was a murder actually happened during Prohibition. The place itself was a speakeasy serving alcohol illegally. The beach below was a smuggler's beach. And there were no records of any sort of police attacks or raids on the place. And that was pretty clear on the restaurant, because apparently the mayors of the major cities in the Bay Area, even the governor, would come by for a drink once in a while. It was one of those places outside of organized crime, so to speak. But people thought, they weren't sure about it. They thought there might have been raids on the smuggler's beach below. So we asked about that, and we got a description of 3 separate raids by the government men, the FBI, at the time. A few months later, I was interviewing one of our early witnesses for the USS Hornet Aircraft Carrier Museum, an ex-Navy SEAL who had seen a ghost with someone else on the ship. And even though he didn't really believe in ghosts, here's what happened, and told us about this figure who disappeared. And we finished up the interview with him. And then he says, as he takes off the microphone, he said, "Oh, I know you guys go over to the Moss Beach Distillery. You want to hear my experience with the ghosts when I was a kid?" So I have this new case directly connecting to the old case. And then he describes that his father was an attorney for the state of California during Prohibition. And he and several other state officials were along with the G-men, the government men, on the 3 raids of the beach below the restaurant where they were bringing in alcohol from Canada. And he starts describing what his father had told him. And it was exactly what Annette had described, or what the ghost had described. So that was a very, very strange thing. The other thing that happened that weekend is I was behind the bar area late at night. No one else in the bar, cocktail area. People, Annette and 2 other psychics were elsewhere in the restaurant. And I literally felt like something was walking through me, and kind of a short bit here, back and forth. It actually felt pretty good, giggly. And I got a picture in my mind. So I definitely was not seeing through my eyes. So when I say about not seeing a ghost, not with my eyes. So my mind's eye gets a picture of this young woman with her hair, kind of a honey blonde hair. It's up it's up. She's wearing certain jewelry, little black dress, more or less, walking back and forth through me. After 2.5 minutes, because I started timing, Annette and the 2 other psychics come around the corner, look over at me, burst out laughing. Annette says, "Oh, she's been walking through you, isn't she?" And then the other 2 made some comments. After we finished, I separated them, had them write down who they saw, and their descriptions matched each other down to the jewelry and my mind's eye. So that was one of my strangest experiences.
I thought you were going to say somebody's been walking straight through you because you were stood there like with like an orgasmic face or something.
Well, the funny thing is that what I mentioned earlier about asking the ghost, the same ghost, what she missed most about life, about sex and food. And when that came out, everybody was laughing about that. And Annette says, "Well, Loyd almost had sex with him."
Do you think that ghost was walking through you just to sort of like say, "I'm here," and then somehow interact with your brain?
Absolutely. No question in my mind. Yeah.
That's a great story, that one. And I also like the fact that the other one is linked. I always think there's links everywhere in life. We just have to recognize them.
Honestly, it was because we had no way of confirming the stuff that Annette told us. I mean, there may be stuff I'm sure there's stuff in the FBI archives somewhere in the basement of the FBI building in DC. It's not digitized, that's certainly. We had no way of determining that happened, because there was no real newspaper accounts of anything at that point either.
Good corroboration, though.
Yeah.
Loyd, we are now entering the Koit zone. Koit zone! Now, in the Koit zone, I would just ask you random questions. It's more about your personality than it is your knowledge of psi, etc., etc. So, have you ever tried a food that you thought would be gross, but turned out to be lush?
Yes, uni.
Oh, what's uni?
Um, that is a Japanese delicacy from, trying to remember what the name of the actual critter is. It's a hard shell critter. Sea urchin.
Oh God, yeah, that doesn't sound nice.
Yeah, it didn't look good. And I was in Japan. They kind of made, the Japanese group kind of made me try it, and I didn't not like it. It was not great, but it was good. It was good.
Compared to what your brain said it was going to be,
Yeah,
yeah.
right, exactly.
Is there a type of music that you loathe?
Country,
Really? Wow. Do you know what everyone always
twangy country
chooses?
music. I just don't like it.
No,
It
that's
just
fair.
bothers me. Yeah, no, nope, don't like it.
What
I'm an
would you
R&B. I'm an
suggest?
R&B and jazz kind of guy.
No, that's cool. What do you think everyone else normally says at this point? And I haven't asked
Probably
everyone this
rap.
one, but
Probably rap music.
see, that's the one I would always think people choose because I hate rap with a passion, but it's always
I,
heavy
I'm not.
metal.
I'm not a fan of rap either. But honestly, yeah, country bothers me.
I like that one. Who would win in a fight, Fred Flintstone or Barney Rubble?
Oh, Fred would win without question.
Yeah, he's got a few hay
He out,
balers
he
in
out,
him, hasn't he?
well, yeah, he's taller and he outweighs him by probably 100 pounds. So
Yeah, Fred's got it going on. What was the last film you saw at the cinema?
the Marvels.
Oh, really? Very, very recent then.
Saw it a couple nights ago. Yeah,
What did you reckon?
I liked it. I mean, it wasn't great, but it was not as bad as people were thinking it was going to be or was.
Mm.
There's some actually really amusing stuff in it. I found pretty much fun.
I'll watch it, but I think Marvel's has been doing not Marvel's, but Marvel itself has been doing
Yeah, I
this, hasn't
know.
it?
I
Which is a
agree.
shame.
Yeah, a lot of folks are talking about that. I am excited to see what James Gunn does with DC, though.
Yes, yeah. Well, I really like the Zack Snyder cut of
I like the
that. I
Snyder
can't
cut
remember
as
the film.
well. Yeah, the Justice League. I like
That's
the
it.
Snyder cut as well, but frankly, as a DC Comics reader, Snyder's vision of the DC universe is really dark,
Very
and
dark. Mm.
I really don't like that as much. Fortunately, Aquaman was not dark. I mean, I'm looking forward to the new Aquaman movie. The Wonder Woman movies are really great, but the other stuff, that wasn't Superman the way I think of Superman. So
No, no, fair enough. Fair enough. What is the fastest you've ever traveled in a car?
probably, let's see, maybe 105 miles an hour.
Yeah, and let's not. You didn't just admit that, did you? You weren't driving. Let's just say
I
that.
wasn't driving. No.
Yeah. Always best to put a caveat in there.
Yeah, I
If you
definitely
could,
wasn't.
if you could only ever drink one drink for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Are we talking alcohol or non-alcohol?
Just a drink, so whatever your mind says.
If I could only drink, well, see, here's the thing. I'm diabetic, so I'm kind of limited here with what I can do. Um, Probably iced tea because that's what I like to drink most of the time.
Cool, iced tea it is.
Oh no, I take that back. It would have to be coffee.
Coffee, okay. Coffee it is.
Yeah.
You have a time machine, right? And you can go back to any point in your life. Where would you go and what would you do or observe?
Let's think for a second. I might have gone back. I might go back to give myself advice in college to double major in anthropology, which is what I was doing, and also radio, TV, film.
I like what you did there. You went into self-investment rather than actual investment. You didn't go and say, I'm going to buy a shitload of Bitcoin." Good on you. Um, Favorite chocolate?
Okay, so now you're talking to somebody who knows chocolate. I do guided chocolate tastings.
Yeah, so yeah, you
So
said you were a chocolatier.
yeah, so right now my favorite chocolate makers, because I don't have a specific favorite. I mean, I mainly do dark chocolate of 70 to 80%. And my favorite are chocolate produced by Manoa Chocolate in Hawaii.
Very specific.
Yeah, Maru Chocolate, Marou chocolate. They are actually in Vietnam, but they produce stuff and ship it all over the world. And Amano Chocolate, who is they're centered in Utah, but Art Pollard, the chocolate maker, who I've met him many times over the years, makes phenomenal chocolate. Those are my three favorite chocolate makers.
And obviously, you just mentioned that you were a diabetic. Does that mean you can make this stuff but not eat a lot of it?
I can eat, one of the benefits of really dark chocolate is there's very little sugar. First of all, you don't really eat a whole bar. There's very little sugar in, like an ounce of chocolate comparatively. And there's some evidence that cacao, the chocolate itself, is something that helps regulate blood sugar. So
Yes, the whole insulin thing. Yeah.
yeah. So it really has not a problem. When I make chocolate for folks, I'm using really dark chocolate most of the time. So it's not been a problem for me. I do sample, let's put it that way.
Good on you. I'm on a carnivore diet, right? The keto thing, and I'm into the dark chocolate, that side of things. So yeah, I'm also becoming a connoisseur of that, which is weird because I was a heavy chocolate eater prior to this experience. But hey ho.
Yeah.
Right, you get to ask. Sorry, you get one answer to any question you could ever think of. What would be your question?
What are ghosts made out of?
And we'll leave it at that because I don't have the answer. But it's a good question. What
You
are
didn't
they
say I
made
have
out
to
of?
ask you a question you knew the answer to. So
True, true. When your socks get old and it's time to replace them, what goes first, the toe or the heel?
the heel.
Fair play. That's my girlfriend's always goes at the heel. I always go at the toe. Strange question, I know, but I like to know the answer. What's the worst physical injury you've ever sustained?
As an injury,
Yeah.
I've never actually broken a bone. So probably the worst was the one that actually where I discovered that my knees have loose cartilage. One of my first and only time skiing.
Oh God. What did it give
Yeah,
away and then sort of dislocate or something?
my knee kind of gave away, and not from the actual skiing, but actually being taken up the hill on a tow rope, and somebody let it go, held onto it, let it go, and myself and three other people behind me flew like a rubber band snapping,
Oh Christ.
and that killed my knee. Yeah.
Oh God. Horrible one. If you were offered the choice to live forever as you, and you can answer this as two ways. You can answer us yourself now, current age, or yourself at any age of your choosing. Would you take it? So if you were offered the choice to live forever as you, would you take it?
Yeah, but I would have been definitely probably about 30 years younger. So in my 30s.
Yeah.
And I would take it. Yeah. Yeah,
Cool.
there's enough in this world that would keep me interested. So I wouldn't be bored out of my mind.
I think you're right. There's enough mystery there, and when we
Yep.
solved one mystery, there's another one. So
Yep.
yeah, good on you. That is the end of the Koit zone. So we have two final questions for you. The one we ask everyone, which is, what else do you like to do in your downtime? Any activities or guilty pleasures?
Um, Movies and television is one thing. I a lot of what I do, like mentalism and performing, I like to practice and get into that, and love to read comic books.
Fair play. I love that. And the last question, what are you currently working on?
Well, right now I'm working on the last few classes for the two courses I teach for the Rhine Research Center. And then I'm planning on this December, when I'm off work for a few weeks, to actually bring my paranormal casebook back into print. I'm just going back through the OCR manuscript, and also hopefully my Mind Over Matter book, as well as a workbook from my late colleague Annette Martin, a psychic development workbook. I'm going to try to get that back out on Amazon.
Excellent stuff. And on that topic of your books, by the way, all the people listening and or watching this, click the links in the descriptions. Go and have a look at Loyd's books. Go and buy them. He's got a lot of interesting stuff. To be fair, you've given me a shed load of stuff tonight that's allowed puzzle pieces to fall into place for me. So thank you ever so much for enlightening me. And thank you ever so much for coming on the podcast.
You're very welcome.
To watch other KoitCast episodes, please click the image top left. To subscribe to my channel, please click the image top right. Please like and share to help KoitCast grow, and most importantly of all, please click the notification bell so you never miss an upload.